Tonight on Proms Extra, we unveil a different side to Bach. Mozart gets dissected in more ways than one, and the China Philharmonic take the list. Hello and welcome to Proms Extra, the show that looks over all things proms from the last 7 days. This week, besides discussing Mozart and Bach and Liszt, we unplug the sound secrets of Radio 3, and David Owen Norris shows off with grace and vigour in Chord of the Week. It's been a busy second week for the proms, and we're not playing second fiddle to anyone. Just some of the highlights from this week in the Royal Albert Hall. So, who is in our studio in the Royal College of Music tonight? Well, first we have a celebrated soprano with not one but two performances to come in this proms season, one tomorrow and the second on Monday. It's Carolyn Sampson. Next we have a renowned pianist who's played the proms more times than he cares to remember, and he is one of two members of the Proms Extra family on the sofa today. It's a welcome return to Stephen Huff. And fresh from his performance a few days ago at the proms is the brilliant violinist and another Proms Extra family member, it's Daniel Hope. And closing the show will be a performance by a group heralded as one of the most exciting on the chamber music circuit. The Heath Quartet. So welcome to all of you. And Daniel, I must ask, have you recovered from that extraordinary piece by Gabriel Prokofiev, that world premiere you gave?
I think I'm still in recovery, actually. It was a huge thrill for all of us, and to have the chance to launch a new child into the world is very exciting. We're still riding on the high. And
working with the Boris and Istanbul Phil for their first ever concert as well. That must
fantastic. A tremendous orchestra. Sasha Goetzel, a conductor so full of energy, and you know the orchestra was so honoured and thrilled to be here at the proms. We've been building up to this for a long time, and one had the feeling that the energy in that hall was just limitless.
And we're going to be seeing a little bit more from them later, which I'm very much looking forward to. But before that, in the beginning, there was Bach, the grandfather of classical music, and this year, for the very first time, we have both of his epic, dramatic, choral passions in the same prom season. We've got the St. Matthew Passion in September, which will be conducted by Sir Simon Rattle. And last weekend, we had an acclaimed performance of the St. John Passion. Now, Carolyn, Bach, very much a staple of your repertoire. So for those of us watching who may not have seen the St. John Passion before, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the St. John Passion tells the story of the events leading up to and the crucifixion of Christ. And it's in contrast to the St. Matthew Passion, for example, it's much more compact, and the chorus has a very big role to play. They're very much involved in the drama of the piece, and I think that was reflected in this year's prom.
Well, let's see a clip of the performance of the St John Passion now, conducted by Sir Roger Norrington. He was conducting the Zurich Chamber Orchestra and the Zürcher Sing Academy.
Da schrien sie wieder allesamt und sprachen: Nicht diesen, diesen nicht, nicht diesen, sondern Barabbas, nicht diesen, sondern Barabbas, Barabbas. Barabbas aber war ein Mörder. Da nahm Pilatus Jesum und geißelte ihn.
The Zurich Chamber Orchestra there performing the St John Passion. And Stephen, I mean, this is Bach at his gutsiest, his boldest, his most dramatic, isn't it?
It's astonishing, isn't it? I mean, that extract that we just heard, it could almost be Michael Tippett. You know, it's so extraordinary to hear it, I mean, even after this time. And the modern design of this mosaic, in a sense, it's not like an opera where you have a steady progression. Even though the story is steady, you have the chorales, you have the recitatives, you have the arias and so on, and they're very different in style, and somehow all together you get this mosaic that adds to the bigger picture of the story Bach wants to tell.
And Carolyn, what we heard there from James Gilchrist, who had the major role there of the evangelist, he was doing some extraordinary things with his voice. And tell us about the challenges of singing a work like this.
Oh, well, I mean, for the evangelist, for example, he's the storyteller, he's the narrator, and that clip there with this scourging and this guy, and the word painting is extraordinary. And as you can see, somebody like James is consummate evangelist and really gets into the drama of the piece, and I think that's what you want from your evangelist. Whereas, for example, the arias, they're a different challenge because you're not telling the story in that direct way.
Do you love singing it?
Yeah. Yes.
Why?
Because it's beautiful and because there's so much variety and because Bach, although not an opera composer, not an operatic composer, is a dramatic composer still.
And Stephen, I think one of the things which strikes me about this piece is obviously it's a spiritual work, but it's never pious, is it?
No, it's very earthy, isn't it? And I think you always feel that whether or not you believe in the story and whether it has a personal significance, somehow it is an everyman story of an innocent man going to his death and somehow finding the capacity to forgive even at that worst time, which I don't think there's ever a time in human history when that's not something important to try and achieve.
Well, we can have another quick burst of the St John Passion. We're going to hear the chorale right at the very end now. It is absolutely beautiful, isn't it? And Daniel, this isn't the homework Bach that I always think of from, as an amateur pianist practicing studies and two-part inventions as a kid. You know, this is drama and beauty and passion and guts, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's Bach the master, and the drama, I think it's so compelling in Bach's music, although I would say in the piano music, in the violin music, it's also there, but it's different here. And I think also that's the reason perhaps why certain great directors have even done semi-staged versions. Robert Wilson, for example, the John Passion, where he took the narrative even further and brought in other elements. The music lends itself to that. It's just incredible, incredibly hard to sing, I can imagine, but amazing to listen to.
And you have worked with Sir Roger Norrington, I know, on many occasions, and he got some very interesting reviews for his particular interpretation in this performance. People said it was idiosyncratic, some people thought it was quite fast, but there was certainly an energy to it, which for a guy in his 80th year now was quite something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he is completely unique, Sir Roger. He has his opinions. It's fascinating to work with him. The very first time we met was playing Mozart, in fact, and he was very dogmatic about the way he wanted the sound to be. And we went along with it, and then we got to the pause, and we went off, and he said, "Is that okay?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Because if it's not, tell me to get lost." You know, he's somebody that throws himself into music making, and we've had a wonderful time together, performing everything from Bach to Alban Berg. and you never quite know what to expect.
He does seem such a sort of a cornerstone of our musical knowledge now, our musical classical culture, doesn't he now, Stephen? But there was a time when people thought he would never be fashionable.
Well, yes, and it wasn't really until the 20th century that he took an absolute centre place in everyone's life, because performers didn't play Bach in the late 19th century. They played Bach Busoni and Bach Liszt and transcription. The idea of actually playing Bach in concert is something, and not even until the second half of the 20th century. It's a surprisingly late development.
Do you find that audiences respond well to Bach in your experience, Carolyn?
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know whether that's because the people that come to performances of Bach are expecting Bach and know what's coming. They're exciting, and yet they give you space for contemplation as well. I think there's something for everyone in that.
I think it's wonderful that when they sent the Voyager spacecraft up and they put some music on there was Bach in there, and the idea of an alien one day perhaps actually listening to it. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's something that it goes on forever, his music, and perhaps it really will.
People always told us when we were kids in my family that if we were practiced our Bach, it would improve our maths. I don't know, did anybody else get told that?
I was terrible at maths.
I didn't play enough Bach, obviously.
Well, still to come here on Proms Extra, performance by the Heath Quartet, plus Chord of the Week, which focuses on Mozart. But before that, as I'm sure you know by now, during the season, Radio 3 broadcasts every note live of every single prom from the Royal Albert Hall, and you would be forgiven perhaps for thinking that sound is sound, and what works for TV or on a CD would work for radio, right? Wrong. Radio 3 has its own particular requirements for broadcast, and Proms Extra went off with a mic to unplug Radio 3's secrets for creating audio dynamite.
I'm Sarah Moore-Peach, and I'm one of the people who presents the Proms on Radio 3. We broadcast every prom live over the summer, and there is an amazing team of people responsible for translating that sound to your radio.
What we're trying to achieve is for our listeners at home that they are actually sitting in the best seat in the hall, so that you've got the sense of the acoustic that you're listening in, but you've also got close enough detail that you can hear all those lines that the orchestra are playing.
Andy, it's Chris.
Hi, Andy.
I'm going to hit one of the piano mics. Can you tell me which one I'm hitting, please?
Yeah, that's left.
Okay.
Every venue has its own challenges, and the Albert Hall, because it's so vast, you do tend to get something of a slap back down from the dome. You'll hear the brass play, and you'll hear the direct sound coming to you, and then you'll hear the sound that goes up and it reflects off the roof and comes down, so you end up kind of almost hearing things twice. We've got the advantage with microphones that we can actually overcome that by maybe going in a bit closer. Should we just check the heights of these ones?
Well, this is just instructions for what we're doing at the moment, which amounts to just a bit of light plumbing, really. We plug the right thing into the right hole. It's just making sure the right microphone is in front of the right instrument and stays there, so that Chris, who's doing the mix in the truck, is getting the right sounds at the right time.
6 and a bit.
It's a bit okay.
So
that's fine. So this is a bit the bigger to the back.
Yeah, and the choir's tracking the GM, so that's good.
Oh, good. That's good. I mean, there'll be more tonight, but
that's fine, because that was 6, and we've got more in hand then.
That's fine.
The quiet bits we're making louder, and the loud bits we're making quieter, but we're trying to keep it all proportional so that it reflects the music.
While the music's being balanced in the truck, the presentation of every prom has to come directly from the Royal Albert Hall itself. So here we are in the presenter's box. I sit here with my headphones on. The producer can talk to me here. I speak into this microphone. And what you hear when you're listening on the radio is a mix of me and the music. And the best thing about this spot is that I have a fantastically good view right out onto the stage. So whatever happens, I can respond to it immediately and bring the concert alive for you on the radio.
This is the Loja box that the Albert Hall makes available for us each year, and it's a bit cramped, it's a bit hot, otherwise it's lovely. So this is actually the focal point of the Radio 3 operation, because the music mix comes through here, and I can bring Sarah in. She's just the other side of the glass out there doing her commentary. Just occasionally, if the announcer wants to know something, they may even hold up a piece of paper to the glass and say what's going on, or, you know, who am I handing back to at the end of the show.
So that that was my minute cue. I'm going back on air in just a moment. I have to say, I do this an awful lot, and I've been presenting the Proms for about 8 or 9 years, and you can get a bit blasé about it, sitting here in the Albert Hall with all this amazing music and atmosphere. But actually, every time my red light goes on and I'm back on air, I do get a little flutter of excitement. That said, when I finish presenting, I can just sit back and listen to the music, which is not a bad job. Welcome back for the second half of the concert tonight, Ravel's complete Daphnis and Chloe ballet. Here's Joseph Proms, tonight's conductor, bringing the BBC Symphony Orchestra to their feet.
Sarah's right, it is one of the nicest seats in the hall, actually. It's a really privileged position to be able to sit in that Radio 3 booth and see the conductor and see the performers from the side of the stage there, although I have more suites than she does. Anyway, whenever I'm presenting, they are the unsung heroes, aren't they, of the Proms, those technicians. I mean, you guys must work with them so closely all the time. I mean, Daniel, you've been working with them just a few days ago. What do you expect of these sound technicians when you're performing here?
Well, firstly, you have a huge respect for what they're doing. And, you know, they make you sound better. So you're very much in their hands and dependent on them. So it's always in the rehearsals, the moment they come up, they check, are you okay? Is the mic close enough or not too close? You don't want to hit it, you know, obviously with the bow. There are all sorts of considerations. And then you know, well, it's the BBC. They've been doing this for such a long time, and, you know, you let go. But it's always there. You're still conscious of it. It's a fascinating moment to see that happen.
And there's such skill, isn't there, Stephen, in crafting that sound world for different mediums, for TV, for radio, or if you're recording in a studio.
Totally, and of course they're working very much at the last minute a lot of the time. They have to be quick, and a hall like the Albert Hall, a vast hall, difficult to get the sound, particularly of a big orchestra. You know, the things can bounce off the walls, or there can be a lack of clarity or different balance issues.
How do you find the acoustic for playing the piano in the hall?
Well, it's always because you're actually in the worst. You were saying about being in the best seat in the house. Sitting at the piano, you are in the worst seat to hear the instrument because the wooden lid is projecting the sound that way. The microphones are over there. So I'm really trusting myself as far as broadcast into these people. It's a similar thing when you're playing outdoors, when the sound isn't just acoustic, because in a sense, in the hall, it is acoustic. It's just the microphones are there for the people at home. But when you're playing outdoors, then you're actually trusting them not just for the sound there around you, but the sound out on the lawn, perhaps.
But when you are playing outdoors, presumably there are a whole world of things that can go wrong, which we're slightly more protected from here in the hall. But, I mean, the weather, for example?
Well, 1 week ago, in fact, exactly a week ago tonight in Cleveland, at the Blossom Festival, we had an enormous thunderstorm, so that the entire orchestra shrieked and jumped out of their seats. I actually went like this because I thought it was a bomb going off. It was the middle of cadenza of the Liszt First Piano Concerto, and I was at the point of a trill, and I went back to the trill, and then there was applause and laughter and another thunderstorm. And I thought I was going to keep this trill going. So for about a minute, I was trilling away at the top of the piano. Then it sort of calmed down, and I carried on with the cadenza. But it was shocking, but kind of fun. I like sometimes those challenges, or great noises from the streets, if you're in the middle of an urban setting.
I had a plague of frogs once in the slow moment of the Beethoven Concerto.
Oh, very biblical.
It became so loud that you couldn't actually hear the music anymore. And of course, then the audience dissolves into laughter, and you're trying to be as devoted as you can. It wasn't easy.
I mean, Carolyn, as a singer, I mean, those challenges must be even more, well, nerve-wracking, I guess, because it's, you know, it's you.
Yes, yes. I mean, what I find the specific sort of, or the biggest challenge with microphones in live performances is whether you sing to the hall, whether you're really projecting into the, in this case, rather big hall, or whether you're sort of singing for the microphone, where you might want to sometimes keep a lid on it a little bit because you don't want to sort of jar anything.
It's interesting, actually. Some people who've only experienced music in a pop or a jazz setting are surprised that classical music is an entirely acoustic art, that we actually, all of our training and all of our practice is to producing a sound in its own space with no help from electronics. Obviously, with the Proms, we're talking about broadcasting, but we're not talking about amplification. And actually, a number of people have found that surprising, that this box, your tiny box, my slightly bigger box, is able to project just by its, you know, the way it's built into a large space.
Slightly older box in my case as well.
Yes.
Do you prefer being recorded live, or do you actually rather relish the precision of being in a studio? Now you're looking at each other in a sort of conspiratorial way. So go on. Daniel, what do you prefer?
Do we really?
No, I mean, it's always wonderful to have a record for many reasons. You know, in the case of the concerto this week, it was a world premiere, so one wants to record that. But it's also about doing a post-mortem and listening to yourself again and finding out, was it as bad or as good as one thought, learning from that. And yet sometimes, of course, you have a performance and you think, I wish that hadn't been recorded. You know, it goes, it's the rough with the smooth.
But you can't always tell.
No.
You know, from the performance itself, in a way we're perhaps the worst judges of what was good, what was bad, and maybe it also doesn't matter.
But I think in a live performance, the audience don't mind the odd slip either.
I think they quite enjoy it, actually.
Yeah.
It tends to sort of, add to the...
It's okay to be human as well.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
We're not machines, and it's never going to be perfect.
And I think actually if you're aiming at perfection, then it restrains you and you're not able to express yourself really in a way. So, and this is something sometimes working with students, just to get them to forget about it and not to bother. You will make mistakes, that's great. The greatest artists made lots of mistakes, you know. And I think then you're free and probably you end up actually playing more accurately if you're not worried about whether you're going to be inaccurate.
That's very good advice. I hope you're all
in
listening.
life as well as in music, perhaps.
Exactly. Well, let's turn to the sound of the China Philharmonic, whose Proms debut was shown on BBC4 last week, and it was a huge programme. And one of the standout performances was by last week's Proms Extra guest, the pianist Hao Chen Zhang. Let's see him in action. Star in the making, we think, here on Proms Extra. That was Hao Chen Zhang performing with the China Philharmonic Orchestra. And Stephen, not only was he playing, I think, the piece in which you trilled for many minutes last week in the rain and the thunder, but also that Liszt piano concerto, I think it was your Proms debut too, wasn't it?
It was about 30 years ago now, which makes me feel extremely old, certainly a lot older than he is.
It's a cracker of a piece, isn't it? I mean, for a young artist especially.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful on many different levels because, of course, it's very, very exciting physically. It's full of virtuosic display, but it's got an amazing soul. Liszt was a wonderful constructor, and in that 20 minutes, you really feel the unity of this piece. He uses the same themes and transforms them in much the same way that Wagner does in his operas, and it's beautifully constructed, and there's a soul there. There's a feeling of the great personality of Liszt, someone who walked onto the stage and instantly people were captivated by this incredible human being.
Carolyn, can you remember your first Proms performance?
I have to admit that I can't. But I remember, though, very clearly my first Proms visit and promming and the queuing and going to see a horn concerto. And that whole atmosphere of being there in the arena, so close to the artists. And I don't know about you, but I love being on stage and having that proximity to such enthusiastic people and the way that faces become familiar over the years. It's very much a regular, loyal audience, and that's very special about the festival.
I mean, I think every Proms artist, particularly after their first time, says this about the audience. And I know that the China Phil, the musicians there, and Hao Chen Zhang as well, they had exactly that same sense of excitement. And you were saying it as well with the Bodosan Istanbul Phil, again, another Proms debut orchestra. They loved it, didn't they?
They did, and you know, we were rehearsing last weekend in Istanbul. They were talking about nothing else. It was this moment of, you know, what's it going to be like when we finally get there. They actually practiced tuning so that they, you know, felt that they would be behaving in the right way, as it were. They were just, it was wonderful to be part of that. And then the buzz backstage in the rehearsal, going up to the concert, the volume was just going up and up and up. They were just so kind of dying to get out there. It was very, very special.
We've got a lot of really exciting new international orchestras playing this season, and Stephen, my impression of that is that it's just opening our eyes and our ears to a whole new sound world, which is rather special.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? I'm sure that in the future, the focus of our Western music will be in the East. I mean, those are the people who are learning the instruments, learning the music, buying the CDs, loving the music, and rediscovering it all over again. And so many people in the West are very jaded about their own tradition. People are so excited about it there, and I think that's fantastic.
Let me just talk a little bit about Sasha Goetzel, the conductor of the Bodosan Istanbul Phil, who you were working with at the Prom. Rarely have we seen a more animated conductor on that podium, and one of the critics wrote that he thought he'd get the best dad dancing prize as well of any maestro this Prom season. I mean, what an accolade. He's quite something, isn't he?
He's amazing, and you know, his enthusiasm, his exuberance, it's infectious, and he's done wonders with that orchestra. I mean, he's built them up over the last 6 or 7 years. He takes an active role in how they play, who plays there, and he was instrumental in getting them here to the Proms. So I think that was also the moment for him to finally get out on that stage and, you know, just loving it, and he really did.
Let's have a quick look at him in action now. He has got some moves. He really has, and he conducts with his cuffs as well, which I particularly love. That concert with Daniel and with the Bodosan Istanbul Phil will be shown on August the 31st on BBC4, so don't miss that. And don't forget that later here on Proms Extra, we've got the Heath Quartet, who'll be playing a piece by Sir Michael Tibbett. But first, let us turn to the graceful tones now of Mozart's Piano Concerto in A major, which was performed earlier this week. And Stephen, you've played this concerto a couple of times, haven't you?
Yeah, at the Proms.
Here at the Proms, yeah, of course, many times, I'm sure, in your career. Tell us what you love about it.
Well, it's one of the most perfect, I think, of all the Mozart. Mozart wrote so many amazing piano concertos, but there's a sort of perfection to this one, I think, that is very especially moving. And also a sunshine, certainly to the first and the third movements. It's one of the most cloudless, in a sense, of all of the Mozart concertos, contrasted with the slow movement, which is one of the most intensely sorrowful and moving movements. But there's just this wonderful grace, precision, and yet improvisation. You can see Mozart making it up as he went along when he was creating it, but also the proportions of it are so perfect and so beautiful. It has amazing singing lines. It all has the grace of dance figures to it. You just have a jewel of such perfection in your hands when you're playing this piece that it's astonishing to do that.
Well, let's take a glimpse now at the soloist Ingrid Fleeter, who was accompanied by the BBC Symphony Orchestra performing Mozart's Piano Concerto, number 23. Mozart's Piano Concerto in A major as performed by the Argentinian pianist Ingrid Fleeter there earlier this week. Now, Stephen, you used the word perfect quite a lot when talking about that work, which must be a weight on your shoulders when you're sitting down to perform it.
Well, but you can't treat it like it's a porcelain figure that's going to break in your hands. Mozart's tough, you know, great things that are made in a perfect way are resilient, you know, and so, no, I think you have to throw yourself into it in one sense. But I think it's just that you're aware all the time that underneath what you're doing, there is this bigger picture of proportion, of architecture that's so beautiful. I think the word beauty comes to mind so much when playing a work like that.
Is that the way you approach Mozart as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, I always find the humor in Mozart is incredible. You know, that's what makes him so difficult, I think, to crack. Is you have this total perfection, and yet you have somebody who is so individual and so cheeky at the same time, and you get elements of this brilliance that comes out, and yet again there's distance there. So trying to penetrate that is something that I think we all work at.
He's always on my dream dinner party guest list, always. You know, I think he'd just be so interesting to me. But moving on from that, flight aside, people always refer to him as a genius. I mean, Daniel, is that too strong a word?
No, I mean, he absolutely is a genius in the same way as Bach and as Schubert, and the consummate genius. But I love the fact that he has so many human elements, so many flaws as well. You read the letters and you read the you know, the torment, and again the humor, the fun that he had, and the ups and downs, and you know, so many of the letters are about money and about love and about he was living life, and his music is perfection, and yet it has this human element. I think that's what makes it so special.
Well, he was a bit of a shambles, wasn't he? I mean, his personal life was crazy and chaotic.
Totally, and you know, he was a billiard champion. You know, he would love to drink. He was, you know, and often we have these visions, these images of these composers, and we know from their portraits as, you know, untouchable, as you say, and that's just not the case. I mean, there's such an extraordinary figure who spoke his mind, who got into so much hot water with the authorities, with the Archbishop. I mean, you know, he was, again, ahead of his time, and yet this music that resonated out of him, which was just to die for.
But we do now have this canon of his work, which we do treat with enormous respect, and yet at the time when he was alive, he was well known as an improviser, wasn't he? That's what he was first and foremost famous for.
Well, almost all composers were. I mean, composers began their creative lives improvising in that sort of moment of creation. Yes, I think it's very dangerous to have this sense of a canon, of the icon, of these, as you were saying, the portrait, because we have the wrong kind of reverence. Of course we want to reverence Bach and Mozart, and they're amazing geniuses, but they wouldn't like us to feel that they were untouchable, because Mozart would have invited us for a game of billiards or a drink, and I don't know what Bach would have done, but involved us in a fight perhaps as members.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know, I think it's a balance, isn't it? Because we need to have the right kind of respect, but also when we're playing a piece of music, for that moment it's ours. The composer's no longer, at least those two composers are no longer with us, and they're in our hands in a good and a bad sense. So we have to have the confidence to play this music and to believe in it, and not to handle it with kid gloves.
Yeah.
And Carolyn, you're singing in Mozart's Requiem tomorrow night. How do you feel when you're performing his work? Do you have that sense of reverence, or do you feel, as Stephen said, that you can own the work?
Absolutely. I think, you know, sort of respect for the work of art that you're performing is there, but I agree that the sort of perfection should be rather freeing, and it can take it out. My sort of little interpretation or something is not going to cause Mozart any trouble, I don't think, and you know, and something like the Mozart Requiem tomorrow. That's one thing, because it's a sacred piece, and we're working as a quartet of soloists. It's not my piece, it's not my show. Whereas singing something like the concert arias, of course, then you're much more free to do your own thing. It's more like a concerto, or and then you can be a bit more free. And the vocal challenges are also different. There's, you know, these ridiculous leaps from low to high and coloratura, and that's a whole different thing, a completely different thing to singing the Requiem.
I always get a special tingle with the Requiem, knowing that it was the last piece of work that he wrote, and that he was almost writing his own Requiem. I mean, do you feel that as a performer?
Yes, of course, it was the last piece he wrote. And then on Monday, of course, we're doing the Taverner Requiem fragments, also the last piece that he wrote. And there is something, you know, about this idea, this slightly prophetic compositions.
Well, we look forward to those very much indeed, and we'll be able to talk about them more in the future as well, I'm sure, once we've heard those performances and seen them. But now, you've heard of Pick of the Week, you've heard of Book of the Week, Quiz of the Week. Well, Proms Extra has Chord of the Week, and today David Owen Norris tinkles with the aforementioned Mozart Piano Concerto.
You might have missed the chord of the week there. It's a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing, this one. Not very Mozart, is it, with that grinding discord in the middle of it? This concerto balances two contrasting principles, grace and vigour. On the one hand, although it's a concerto in A major, we hear a lot of D major, what we call the subdominant, like a graceful bow. And on the other hand, we've got the vigour of busy repeated notes. Nearly every theme has them. Or... And Mozart announces both those principles of vigour and grace right at the beginning. We've got our vigorous repeated notes in the bass, and the graceful D major chord here already. Now, Mozart could have written his tune like this. And then there wouldn't have been a discord with his graceful D in the bass. But instead he chooses to repeat his melody note E. But he wants to have his cake and eat it, so he puts his graceful D in the bass as well, and it's the collision of those two principles that produces this arresting discord, the chord of the week. It's an oral red flag from Mozart to warn us that the next half hour is going to be a tug of war between grace and vigour.
The ever cordial David Owen Norris will be back next week with his sage music dissections. Well, we're almost at the end of this week's show, but so much more coming up. Come on, what are you looking forward to in this next week after, of course, your own performances?
Yes, well, looking through the coming week, there are loads of things that really sound wonderful. Mahler 9 and all sorts of things, Chopin Piano Concerto. I personally would love to see the Oedipus Rex, just because there are such nice people singing in it. So good friends and colleagues, and yeah, why not?
Absolutely. Stephen, what are you looking forward to?
I'm going for a friend too, Mark Wigglesworth and the National Orchestra of Wales. I think it was the very first piano concerto Mark ever conducted that I was part of many, many years ago. So we've played together many times over the years, and he's doing Elgar First Symphony. And I do think that Elgar and the Albert Hall have a very particular connection that is very resonant for me. So I'm looking forward to that.
And Daniel, your top tip?
Oh, it's tough, but Mahler 9 and Vaughan Williams' Tallis Fantasia, BBC Scottish and Runicles. I adore the Vaughan Williams. It's just one of my favourite pieces of all time. And to have it paired with Mahler 9, I think is really interesting. I think that would be a very special concert.
Some excellent advice there, but just some of the highlights that our guests are looking forward to. Tomorrow night on BBC4, I'll be presenting a concert, one of many that marks the 150th anniversary celebration of Richard Strauss. And here's a glimpse of what's to come. A preview of the Strauss concert, which you can find on BBC4 tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I'd urge you to have tissues at the ready. Don't forget as well, you can watch Proms every Thursday, Friday and Sunday. Radio 3 broadcasts every Prom live, and you can find this episode of Proms Extra and all the works we feature in this programme in the Proms Extra collection on the BBC iPlayer. But that is it for Proms Extra. I'll be back next week with violinist Janine Jensen, conductor Zachary Oromo and the singer Sir Willard White. And all three of them will be performing, and I'm not going to say any more about that just yet. My thanks, though, to my guests tonight, to Carolyn Sampson, Stephen Huff and Daniel Hope. Playing the show out is a group who will be appearing at the Proms on Monday night in the world premiere of John Taverner's Requiem Fragments. Tonight on Proms Extra, they're performing a piece by another one of the giants of British music, a contemporary of Benjamin Britten, Sir Michael Tippett. Here is the Heath Quartet. Goodbye.